This program is brought to you by SMC Infrastructure, building a better world.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. We're moving to the next stage of the pandemic, and as the world resets to the new normal, we find ourselves seeking the right balance between health and livelihood, constantly adjusting the boundaries between liberty and responsibility. And now to the news. The government of Lebanon has given an investigative committee 4 days to determine responsibility for the devastating explosion in Beirut port, according to Foreign Minister Charbel Webe, and he told this to French radio on Thursday. Take a look. It began with fire in the port and then an explosion. An explosion so great it created a mushroom-shaped cloud, drawing comparisons with Hiroshima and the devastation caused by its shockwave with the scene of an earthquake. Everyday lives were shattered, even a wedding photo shoot as this. A massive explosion rips through Beirut's port and surrounding neighborhoods. Now, countries dispatched emergency medical aid, filled hospitals, rescue experts, and tracking dogs to Lebanon on Wednesday. The provisional death toll from the massive blast stood at 137 Thursday, but with dozens missing and 5,000 wounded, the number of victims was expected to rise as rescue workers continued to comb through the rubble. Now, the Beirut governor estimated up to 300,000 people may have been made temporarily homeless by the disaster, which he said would cost the debt-ridden country in excess of $3 billion. On Wednesday, the government called for the house arrest of those responsible for the storage of a large quantity of ammonium nitrate, a substance used in fertilizers and explosives, in the port of the Lebanese capital. Now, according to Lebanese officials, the explosion was caused by a fire igniting 2,750 tons of the substance in a portside warehouse. Prime Minister Hassan Diab and President Michel Aoun have promised to put the culprits behind bars, but trust in institutions is low and few on the streets of the Lebanese capital hold out hope of an impartial inquiry. Human Rights Watch on Thursday supported mounting calls for an international probe as the only credible option. Meanwhile, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres expressed his deepest condolences to the families of the victims as well as to the people and government of Lebanon following the horrific explosions in Beirut. Take a look.
Statement we issued yesterday, the Secretary General expressed his deepest condolences to the families of the victims, as well as to the people and government of Lebanon following the horrific explosions in Beirut. He wishes a speedy recovery to the injured, including several United Nations personnel working in Lebanon. The United Nations remains committed to supporting Lebanon at this difficult time and is actively assisting in the response to this incident. As a result of the explosion, one of the UNIFIL ships of the Maritime Task Force docked in the port was damaged, leaving some UNIFIL naval peacekeepers injured, some of them seriously. UNIFIL transported the injured peacekeepers to the nearest hospitals for medical treatment. The mission is currently assessing the situation. The head of Mission and Force Commander, Major General Stefano Del Col, said, "We are with the people and the government of Lebanon during this difficult time and stand ready to help and provide any assistance and support." The United Nations is working closely with the Lebanese government to support all ongoing response efforts, particularly in the delivery of emergency medical assistance. Support for the existing hospitals and trauma response capacity is a top priority for the UN. The World Health Organization is working closely with the Lebanese Ministry of Health to conduct an assessment of hospital facilities in Beirut, their functionality and needs for additional support, particularly amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Specialists are being dispatched to Beirut at the moment to assist in the emergency response, both from the United Nations and multiple member states. Experts are en route to support urban search and rescue operations. Teams are also equipped to conduct rapid assessments about the situation on the ground and help coordinate emergency response activities.
Now, this handout satellite Images courtesy of CNES 2020 released on August 5 by Airbus DS shows a view of the port of Beirut on January 25, 2020, and on August 5, a day after a blast in the warehouse in the port of the Lebanese capital, sowed devastation across entire city neighborhoods, killing now an updated one more than 140 people, wounding thousands, and plunging Lebanon deeper into crisis. Beirut is now in a 2-week state of emergency. Nearly half of Lebanese now live below the poverty line, according to official statistics. Economic difficulties were a key driver of mass protests that began last year against a political system widely seen as corrupt and inept. The economic crisis has been compounded by the loss of income caused by restrictions to stem the COVID-19 pandemic. 2/3 of Lebanese households have seen their income drop, according to a WFP survey in June, while 2/5 of those questioned had gone into debt to buy food or pay rent. WFP, working with the government, was planning to boost aid to help 697,000 people this year, up from just under 140,000 in 2019, according to spokesperson Malak Jaafar, before the explosions. Meanwhile, an OFW survivor from the blast described her ordeal. Let's listen in.
May iyak sa akin kasi mamaya ano tong kamay ko, may gina, hindi pa kasi ito natahi. Ito kasi talaga yung malakas ang ano talaga.
Opo. Sige po, palakas po kayo ha.
Respect.
Ingat po kayo.
May anak lang kasi may pagpakuha yata yung nurse.
Opo.
Tawag na lang ulit ako message.
O sige po, salamat po.
Anong na-damage sa'yo?
Ito.
Oh.
Ito ba? Salamin kasi ang nakaano nito.
Nasugatan ka ng salamin?
Salamin. Tapos dito sa part na ito ng bandage yan. Puro salamin lang.
Sa ulo, wala naman?
Wala naman po. Tapos yun dyan sa paa ko. Tingnan sa paa ko. Yan. Yung bandage na yan.
Yaharang. Sa'yo?
Hindi pa naman ano kasi kailangan dapat pag pinahin na natin. Kailangan dapat na-move. Kasi kailangan.
Asan na yung madam mo? Wala pa?
Yung madam ko nag-travel siya, pero yung assistant niya lang pumupunta dito na talagang nagbabantay lang dito.
Tapos?
Ayun. Nag-usap naman
Buti mayroong nakapag-rescue sa'yo. Papunta dito.
Buti nga lang talagang loob talaga. Nung nandun pa kami sa Asrape talaga. Talagang.
Ay, sa Asrapiye ka? Akala ko sa Asmiye ka.
Asrape kami na ano sis. Yung nakita mo yung sumabog na mga sa logistic, umabot dun sa bahay namin.
Pero wala naman daw internal na damage?
Wala naman kasi pinaradjolid nila ako lahat.
Wala naman,
kasi
normal naman.
Talagang nagla-lockdown talaga yung ano ko talaga. Kasi parang gusto ko talaga matulog talaga eh. Pero sabi ng mga nurse, huwag ka matulog. Sabi niya,
pigilin mo. Kasi nga,
pero talagang hindi ko talaga kinaya sis, kaya tinakbo ko dito sa ICU.
yung asawa mo nagme-message, ginamit niya yung.
Nag-usap na kami kanina sis, kasi talaga yung talagang minisid niya lahat.
Pero okay ka na ngayon.
Okay na sis.
Salamat sa Diyos.
The Department of Foreign Affairs, through the Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs, has already reached out to the next of kin of the 2 overseas Filipino workers who died from the explosion in Beirut. Now, since December 2019, the department has already repatriated 1,508 Filipinos from Lebanon. There are still currently around 31,916 Filipinos in Lebanon. The department assures the public, as well as all the other Filipinos in Beirut, that it shall provide all the necessary assistance to the Filipino victims of this terrible tragedy. And French President Emmanuel Macron visited the scene of the blast in the port of Beirut, which killed more than 140 people now and injured 5,000 more, to meet Lebanese officials who were booed by the population who are holding them accountable. He is the highest-ranking foreign official to visit the country since Tuesday's tragedy. Now, President Macron said Thursday he wanted to coordinate international assistance to Lebanon, saying, quote, "I want to organize European cooperation and more broadly international cooperation." In France, meanwhile, prosecutors on Wednesday opened a probe into the blast over injuries inflicted to 21 French citizens. Paris spearheaded international mobilization in support of Lebanon, which will mark its centenary next month, but has looked like a country on its last legs since defaulting on its debt earlier this year. Flights carrying medical aid, field hospitals, rescue experts, and tracking dogs have been flying in since Wednesday to Beirut Airport, which sustained no serious damage from the explosion. Japan marked 75 years since the world's first atomic bomb attack, with the coronavirus pandemic forcing a scaling back of ceremonies to remember the victims. Take a look.
核兵器のない世界と恒久平和の実現に向けて力を尽くすことをお誓い申し上げます。
こうした過去の苦い経験を決して繰り返してはなりません。そのために私たち市民社会は自国第一主義によることなく連帯して脅威に立ち向かわなければ。
Survivors, relatives, and a handful of foreign dignitaries attended this year's main event in Hiroshima to pray for those killed or wounded in the bombing and called for world peace. But the general public was kept away, with the ceremony instead broadcast online. Participants, many of them dressed in black and wearing face masks, offered a silent prayer at exactly 8:15 a.m. or 23:15 GMT Wednesday, the time the first nuclear weapon used in wartime was dropped over the city. Now, speaking afterwards, Hiroshima Mayor Kazumi Matsui warned against the nationalism that led to World War II and urged the world to come together to face the global threats like the coronavirus pandemic. The bomb attack on Hiroshima killed around 140,000 people, many of them instantly, with others perishing in the weeks and months that followed, suffering radiation sickness, devastating burns, and other injuries. 3 days later, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki, where 74,000 people were killed. The historical assessment of the bombings remains the subject of some controversy. The United States has never apologized for the bombings, which many see as having brought an end to the war. Japan announced its surrender just days later on August 15, 1945, and some historians argue the bombings ultimately saved lives by avoiding a land invasion that might have been significantly more deadly. But in Japan, the attacks are widely regarded as war crimes because they targeted civilians indiscriminately and caused unprecedented destruction. In 2016, Barack Obama became the first sitting U.S. president to visit Hiroshima, where he offered no apology but embraced survivors and called for a world free of nuclear weapons. The remnants of Hurricane Isaias are now in eastern Canada after killing at least 6 people in the United States. The storm raked much of the East Coast, spawning tornadoes, downing trees, and triggering flooding from North Carolina to New England. Forecasters warned of heavy rain across 50 miles or 80 kilometers per hour after the storm littered streets with debris and forced the cancellation of scores of flights in the United States. More than 3 million homes and businesses lost power in the U.S. and Canada. The storm earlier dumped torrential rains on the Bahamas, felling trees and flooding streets before emergency management officials on Sunday gave the all clear. At least 1 person died in Puerto Rico, and the storm also lashed Haiti and the Dominican Republic. South Korea is battling deadly floods and landslides. Take a look. Authorities said 16 people have been killed and more than 1,000 forced from their homes as 42 consecutive days of rain, South Korea's longest monsoon in 7 years, triggered floods and landslides. President Moon Jae-in expressed concern about the impact of the 42 days of rain, which weather officials said was the longest such stretch since 2013 on public sector emergency workers already battling COVID-19. He urged all-out efforts to prevent further loss of life, such as action to avert landslides and evacuate people, even in cases of little apparent danger. The Yonhap news agency said most of the flooded roads and bridges along the Han River in Seoul that had backed up traffic and damaged infrastructure were back in operation on Tuesday. And days of heavy rain could also cause flooding or landslides across North Korea, according to officials. As the South said Thursday, 16 people had died in the downpour slashing the peninsula. North Korea is particularly vulnerable to sustained heavy rain, as many mountains and hills have long been stripped of vegetation, allowing water to flow downhill unchecked. But the South has also suffered, with authorities saying at least 16 people had been killed in the past few days by floods in the central region. Another 11 were missing, while 1,600 people had been displaced from their homes, according to authorities. Now, the North's official KCNA news agency said areas hard hit by the downpour include Hwanghae province, a major agricultural region. KCNA did not mention any casualties or damage caused by the rain. At least 138 North Koreans died after torrential rain triggered major floods back in 2016. The United Nations said at that time, more than 160 people were killed by a massive rainstorm in the summer of 2012. 17 people, including 8 children, have been killed in flash floods and by lightning in Yemen's northern Marib region, according to health authorities. Let's take a look.
عائلاتنا محاصرة داخل. أنا هذا بيتي حايز بيني وبين البيتي السيل وعليهم خطر طبعا، محاصرين من الماء. أنا واحد من الأسرة، أنا واحد من هذا السكان هذه المنطقة المحاصرة. أنا الآن برا وعائلتي في البيت محاصرة والماء يحفر عليهم.
Eagle News will be right back.
Skyway Stages 1 and 2, the elevated toll road system project, run from a section of the South Luzon Expressway from Alabang to Magallanes, Makati. The Skyway Stage 3 is an elevated expressway connecting the South Luzon Expressway through the existing Skyway Stages 1 and 2 to the North Luzon Expressway via Balintawak. Skyway Stage 4 is an 80-kilometer mixed elevated and at-grade toll road that will connect the existing Skyway system starting from the FTI section all the way to Bulacan.
Bukas na po ang auditions para sa Tagisan ng Galing Part 2. Mag-audition na po kayo sapagkat mahigit sa 7 million pesos ang nag-aantay na papremyo sa kategorya ng sayawan at kantahan. Opo, Tagisan ng Galing Part 2. Dito lamang po yan sa Net 25.
Welcome back. Australia's second largest city entered the country's toughest lockdown yet on Thursday, sparking a fresh wave of anxiety and confusion over tougher regulations. Prime Minister Scott Morrison warned the latest lockdown would cost the Australian economy up to $9 billion and push the unemployment rate back to 13% after a slight recovery. Let's listen in.
Growth. National unemployment rate is now expected to exceed the forecast peak of 9.25% and may instead peak closer to 10%, which I note is in line with what the Governor of the Reserve Bank was also indicating. But of greater concern, as I've said to you before, is the effective unemployment rate. We know that the measured headline rate of unemployment does not tell the full story about what's happening with people's jobs, and I've been very candid with people about that. And it is estimated the increase in effective unemployment to be between 250,000 and 400,000. Now, that isn't necessarily people who have lost their employment, but it also includes those whose employment has been reduced to 0 hours. But as I said, the effective unemployment rate is the one we're watching. This should see, it is estimated that we would see that effective rate of unemployment, which had fallen in the most recent numbers down to just over 11%, head north again back to where it had come down from, which is in the high 13s. So that is very concerning, that is very troubling, but it is not unexpected. In the circumstances, these measures will have a very significant cost, and it will impact the recovery path. But the task doesn't change. We get on top of this issue in Victoria, and we band together and we make this work.
He also said additional mental health support would be rolled out for Australians working through the stress and anxiety and strain of lockdowns. Melbourne streets were visibly quieter as non-essential businesses were forced to shut under new coronavirus rules expected to be in place for 6 weeks. A second lockdown for the state capital of Victoria began in early July, but additional regulations came into force overnight, requiring hundreds of thousands more people to stay at home. Residents are still allowed to go out during the daytime for exercise and food or for work if their business is deemed essential. Australia has so far recorded almost 20,000 coronavirus cases and 255 deaths. All right, Eagle News, we'll be right back. The Philippines has taken the top spot in terms of testing capacity in the entire Southeast Asian region, having tested more unique individuals than its economically advanced neighbors, according to the Department of Health. Now, as of August 4, the country has 99 licensed testing laboratories and has conducted a total of 1,643,539 tests, or an average of 28,938 tests per day in the past 7 days, according to the department in a news release issued on Thursday. This is significantly higher than Indonesia, which has tested about 908,000 over the same period, or an average of 14,291 tests per day, according to our data. Now, the Philippines' total number of tests conducted relative to its population size is 1.5%, according to the DOH. Despite the observed increase in the number of cases being reported daily, the DOH noted that in terms of deaths and case fatality rate, or CFR, which as of August 5 was at 2,123 with a CFR of 1.8%, the country is still at a better standing compared to Indonesia, which has reported 5,388 deaths with a CFR of 4.7%. The Philippines, in terms of deaths and CFR, is also faring better compared to the global average CFR of 3.7%. The Health Department previously said this observed decrease in deaths and CFR is a result of improved overall case management and treatment protocols. The spread of the novel coronavirus is accelerating in Finland, according to health officials, with new containment measures to be unveiled next week. Now, according to new estimates, the reproduction rate of the virus has now risen above 1 to between 1.1 and 1.4. The Health Ministry Strategic Director Lisa Maria Voipio Halki told a press conference in the capital Helsinki. The situation, she said, is extremely delicate, adding that some sort of second stage has begun. She said whether we can expect a smaller wave or a larger wave depends on how the country responds. Despite the upturn in cases, Finland still has Europe's lowest incidence rate, reporting 2 new cases per 100,000 people in the last 14 days. So far, 7,512 COVID-19 infections and 331 deaths have been reported in the Nordic nation of 5.5 million people, and the number of new cases slowed to a trickle during June and early July. And Scotland will reimpose lockdown restrictions in and around the city of Aberdeen after recording dozens of new coronavirus cases there this week. According to First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, the measures, which include closing all indoor and outdoor hospitality venues by 1600 GMT, follow more than 20 pubs and restaurants being involved in what the First Minister said could become a significant outbreak. Take a look.
Lockdown again.
It's a tough one. I was looking forward to other things, going to restaurants, eating out, meeting friends. But I guess we'll have to wait again. You know, health comes first.
Going into lockdown.
Well, I'm quite peeved about it because we've done so well for 4 months. That the youth, well, Scotland has done very well in the lockdown. And one tourist, shall we say, comes to the town, doesn't self-isolate, goes to the bar, and we're the ones who benefit. We're the ones who have now got to be in lockdown again because of it. I think it's terrible.
Residents in the city of around 229,000 people will be barred from visiting each other's homes and cannot travel more than 5 miles under the reintroduced restrictions. First Minister Sturgeon said the measures would be reviewed after 7 days, which will come in the same week as the planned reopening of many schools across Scotland. And visitors and residents alike mask up as Amsterdam introduced mask-wearing measures in certain busy areas. Now, compliers risk a €95. Non-compliers risk a €95 fine. Take a look.
من فضلك أن تختبر نفسك للمزيد من المعلومات راجع الموقع andere entfernt erleichtern Beschwerden.
Now, Vietnam's central Da Nang city is converting a sports complex into a 2,000-bed makeshift hospital to treat COVID-19 patients. The city has reported more than 180 coronavirus cases since July 25. It recorded its first coronavirus death last July 31st. Take a look. Meanwhile, Vietnam ruled out hydroxychloroquine use and instead will use convalescent plasma for treatment of COVID-19. Ralph Wandolph, Empire reports.
Vietnam has completely halted the use of hydroxychloroquine, the controversial anti-malaria drug touted by U.S. President Donald Trump in its treatment of COVID-19 patients, and instead opted for plasma from recovered cases. The information was announced by Nguyen Van Kinh, former director of the National Hospital for Tropical Diseases and chairman of Vietnamese Society of Infectious Disease, as he discussed the latest revision of the Health Ministry's COVID-19 diagnosis and treatment guidelines. The fourth comprehensive update since the coronavirus cases were first recorded in Vietnam in late January. The Health Ministry noted that while there had not been a definitive drug to treat COVID-19, a variety of antiviral drugs, including the domestically available lopinavir, ritonavir, and interferon, might deliver some results as many patients were cleared of the virus within a week. The U.S.-made and not readily accessible remdesivir, along with pyravir, commonly used in Russia, were also noted as promising by the guidelines. Hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine are no longer used as their effectiveness in dealing with the disease were not ascertained. But the antibody-rich plasma from recovered COVID-19 patients is now considered a solid substitute for antiviral drugs. In the latest guidelines, Keane said that the Health Ministry had clarified SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes the disease, is not just attacking the respiratory system, but also causes problems in all internal organs. Doctors treating COVID-19 cases should also pay attention to risks of cytokine storm, a syndrome in which the body's own immune system goes into overdrive in response to the infection, mistakenly destroying other cells of the body in the process, leading to organ failures and other severe damage. One of Vietnam's most critically ill cases, the otherwise healthy 43-year-old Scottish pilot, spent 2 months on life support due to this syndrome. Patients will be categorized into 5 levels for treatment, with the first level comprising those having no symptoms and progressing in terms of severity of respiratory issues to the 5th level, where the patient is in critical condition. Blood oxygen drops below 92%. They suffer organ failure and other complications such as septic shock, infections, or pulmonary infarction. Regarding children who contracted COVID-19, in the new treatment guidelines, doctors are told to look at possible multi-organ inflammatory lesions similar to the rarely occurring Kawasaki disease, with an array of symptoms including fever, erythema or corneal hyperemia, or submucosal swelling, circulatory failure, heart damage, and blood clotting disorder. In the latest guidelines, mental therapies with the aim of enhancing optimism for the patients were stressed for the first time. Keane said that medical centers should test the patients 3 times, each 24 hours apart, before discharging them. The recovered patients are required to be isolated at their homes for another 14 days after release. Keane cited a case where a patient during the 14-day isolation after being declared clear of the virus had tested positive for the virus again. With this new item, the current criteria for hospital discharge include no fever for 3 days, no clinical symptoms, 3 negative tests in 3 consecutive days, and further medical observation during the 14-day home isolation. Keane also warned that those who have tested negative for the virus using quick test methods should still be staying at home in isolation for 14 days. If they have either gone through virus-hit regions, suffered from some COVID-19-like symptoms, or had contacts with confirmed patients. The latest guidelines instruct the medical centers to conduct the more time-consuming but accurate real-time RT-PCR diagnostics of all suspect COVID-19 cases to avoid missing out on patients. Specifically, cases of fever, cough, and acute respiratory infection that cannot be explained and without epidemiological factors, returning from an outbreak area, exposure to confirmed COVID-19 cases or suspected cases will all be tested. This is Ralph Fondolp Empire bringing you the latest updates here in Vietnam. We live in interesting times.
The risk of COVID-19 infection from breastfeeding is negligible and has never been documented, according to the World Health Organization, in a call for greater support for the practice. The appeal during World Breastfeeding Week comes as the WHO warned that not using mother's milk is linked to 820,000 child deaths a year at a cost to the global economy of $300 billion. Exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months has many benefits for the infant and mother, which far outweigh any risk from the new coronavirus pandemic. Let's listen in.
WHO has been very clear in its recommendations to say absolutely breastfeeding should continue. These are new mothers that they should initiate early, have their baby skin to skin with them, room in with them. There really should be no change from our standard recommendations. The reason for that is that the risks of transmission of the COVID-19 virus from a COVID-positive mother to her baby seem to be extremely low. The interruption of services has been tremendous around the world for providing the kind of support that mothers normally would get with breastfeeding. Oftentimes, the health services that would provide maternal and child health have been diverted to take care of the COVID response. Sometimes families do not feel comfortable in going into health services because they're afraid that they might get COVID, and so they don't come for a routine kinds of support. We have never documented anywhere around the world any transmission through breast milk. We have tested the breast milk of many mothers around the world in a variety of different studies. And while a few studies have found a few selected kind of random odd samples that have had particles of the virus in them, so they've tested positive, when they followed up to see whether the virus was actually viable and could be infective, they could not find any actual infective virus. We have documented through modeling that about 820,000 children's lives are lost every year because of the lack of breastfeeding, and that economically, there are losses of about $300 billion per year in economic productivity lost because of the lack of breastfeeding. Breastfeeding provides benefits during the time of breastfeeding, and those are what are kind of most recognized. So protection against diarrhea, which is one of the top causes of mortality in low-income countries, protection against respiratory infections, against obesity, childhood obesity later on as the children get older, protection against leukemia. In addition, breastfeeding protects the mother against breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and type 2 diabetes later on. So there are benefits for both the mother and the baby. And when we've added these up, it comes out to about 820,000 lives around the world, even in high-income countries.
In other news, Florida, the epicenter of the novel coronavirus pandemic in the southeastern U.S., has surpassed 500,000 cases and now has a death toll of more than 7,600, according to state health authorities. The Florida Health Department reported only 5,409 new daily cases in its latest count, a considerable drop after recent figures of around 10,000 new infections per day in recent weeks. The number of cases, however, may have decreased because testing was largely halted during the recent passage of Tropical Storm Isaias. Public testing centers where people could go for a nose swab were closed on Thursday, reopening only on Monday. The storm swiped Florida's eastern coastline over the weekend, leaving 6 dead now across the southeastern U.S. Now, Florida population 21 million has registered 502,739 total coronavirus cases, according to the health department. That means that close to 1 in every 43 Floridians has tested positive for the virus. Florida has the highest number of virus cases in the country after California, which has about twice Florida's population. In other news, Hong Kong pro-democracy activists Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow called for people to not surrender as they arrived at a court to face trial for the siege of the police headquarters last June 21st. Take a look.
give up and continue to fight for freedom and democracy of Hong Kong. And under the strong sense of fear of the national security law, it is even more important for us Hong Kongers to not surrender and to continue to believe in the universal values of democracy and freedom.
With the political prosecution that we face and under the threat of Beijing, it's not the time for us to surrender, and it's no reason for us to live in fear. Even the government tried to prosecute us with the protest during last summer outside of the police headquarters. It's still not the time for us to give up and surrender.
Meanwhile, 25 Hong Kong democracy activists were charged Thursday with taking part in a banned June Candlelight Vigil marking the anniversary of China's 1989 Tiananmen crackdown. They included prominent activist Joshua Wong, media tycoon Jimmy Lai, and leaders of the Alliance in Support of Patriotic Democratic Movements of China, and were formally charged with knowingly taking part in an unauthorized assembly. Lee Cheuk-yan, chairman of the Alliance, was charged with organizing the assembly on June 4 at the city's Victoria Park. The annual Candlelight Vigil in Hong Kong usually attracts huge crowds and is the only place on Chinese soil where such a major commemoration of the crackdown is allowed. But city authorities banned the event in June for the first time in 30 years, citing measures to control the spread of COVID-19. We'll take a short break. Eagle News will be right back.
Nasa Diyos ang awa, nasa tao ang gawa. Ibig sabihin, kinakailangan ng tao na magpakasipag upang umunlad ang pamumuhay. At dito kaagapay natin ang unlad sa pagbibigay nila ng hanap buhay sa ating mga kababayan.
Sa episode na ito ay tatalakayin natin at aalamin natin ang mga bagay ukol sa poultry o manukan. Ituturo din namin sa inyo ang maaari ninyong pagkakakitaan dyan mismo sa inyong tahanan, ang manukan sa baon.
Samahan niyo po kami sa isa sa pinakamalaking poultry dito sa Pilipinas, ang Maligaya Mega Poultry.
Ako po, si Robin Padilla, at ito ang ulat, kaagapay sa hanap buhay. Dito lamang po sa Net 25.
Okay, our first business news for this hour will come from Jennifer Ringwood, joining us live from the United Kingdom. Hello, Jennifer. What do you have for us?
Hello, Alma. From the United Kingdom, the Bank of England forecast Thursday that Britain's economic downturn, fueled by the coronavirus pandemic, will be less severe than thought. But the national surge in unemployment will delay the recovery. The pound rallied on the update, which included news that the Bank of England had voted to keep its main interest rate at a record low of 0.1%. The Bank of England added that its huge cash stimulus programme used to prop up the British economy before and during the coronavirus pandemic would remain at £745 billion. That's $967 billion. The amount includes £300 billion added to its so-called quantitative easing programme since March, when COVID-19 forced the UK into lockdown. Britain's economy was expected to contract by 9.5% this year, altering the Bank of England's prior guidance of 14% contraction. The Bank of England said in the minutes of its last regular meeting that took place on Thursday, nonetheless, recovery in demand takes time as health concerns drag on activity. It added that GDP is not projected to exceed its level in its 2019's fourth quarter until the end of 2021, in part reflecting persistently weaker supply capacity. The Bank of England estimated that UK gross domestic product would rebound in 2021 by 9%, but down on an earlier forecast for output growth of 15%. The bank added that it does not intend to tighten monetary policy until there is clear evidence that significant progress is being made in eliminating spare capacity and achieving the bank's 2% inflation target sustainability. Britain's official annual inflation rate stands at 0.6%, while unemployment is at 3.9%. The Bank of England also forecast that Britain's unemployment rate would shoot higher to around 7.5% by the end of the year. Employment appears to have fallen since the COVID-19 outbreak, although this has been very significantly mitigated by the extensive take-up of support from temporary government schemes. The minute said, surveys indicate that many workers have already returned to work from furlough, but considerable uncertainty remains about the prospects for employment after those support schemes unwind. The UK companies, from major retailers to airlines, are axing thousands of jobs despite government efforts to safeguard employment during the pandemic. The state has been paying up to 80% of wages for almost 10 million workers under its furlough scheme, which Finance Minister Rishi Sunak plans to end in October. Replacing the scheme is a stimulus package worth $30 billion, including bonuses for companies retaining furloughed staff and offering apprenticeships amid fears of mass youth unemployment resulting from the virus fallout. Recent official data shows Britain's economy tanked in the first quarter by 2.2%, the biggest quarterly contraction for more than 40 years. Economists expect there to have been a far sharper slump in the second quarter, or 3 months to June, placing Britain in a technical recession. Confirmation is due Wednesday, when the first official estimate on the second quarter output is published. Thank you, Alma.
All right. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for your update there, for your business update in the United Kingdom. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you. Reporting for EBC United Kingdom Bureau, I'm Jennifer Ringwood. We live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, gold prices hit $2,000 an ounce for the first time earlier this week, the latest surge in a commodity seen as a refuge during economic uncertainty. Take a look. And the Philippines plunged into recession after its biggest quarterly contraction on record, according to data on Thursday, as the economy reels from coronavirus lockdowns that have wrecked businesses and thrown millions out of work around the world. Now, gross domestic product shrank 16.5% on year in the second quarter, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority, when the country endured one of the world's longest stay-at-home orders to slow the spread of the virus that has devastated economies globally. It followed a revised 0.7% contraction in the first 3 months of the year and marked the biggest reduction in economic activity longevity since records began in 1981 during the leadership of Ferdinand Marcos. It is the country's first recession in 3 decades. The outlook for the archipelago is bleak, with the number of coronavirus infections surging past 115,000 this week, a more than 5-fold increase since early June when the economy crippling restrictions were eased. Without a doubt, the pandemic and its adverse effect on the economy are testing the economy like never before, according to Acting Socio-Economic Planning Secretary Carl Chua. But he said, unlike past crises, the Philippines is now in a much stronger position to address the crisis. Facebook and Twitter took aim at U.S. President Donald Trump and his campaign over a video post in which he contended that children are almost immune to the coronavirus, a claim they said amounted to misinformation. In an extraordinary move, Facebook removed the clip from the president's account, the first time it has taken down one of his posts for violating its content rules. The video, an excerpt from a Fox News interview, includes false claims that a group of people is immune from COVID-19, which is a violation of our policies around harmful COVID misinformation, the Facebook spokesperson said. Now, Twitter, meanwhile, also said it had blocked President Trump's official campaign account over a tweet containing the same video in which President Trump made the case for reopening U.S. schools come September. Now, President Trump defended his comments about the virus effect on children when challenged during a White House press briefing earlier on Wednesday. Let's listen in.
This virus is so
when I say that, I'm talking about from getting very sick. If you look at children, I mean, they're able to throw it off very easily. And it's an amazing thing because some flus, they don't. They get very sick and they have problems with flus and they have problems with other things. But for whatever reason, the China virus, children handle it very well. And they may get it, but they get it and it doesn't have much of an impact on them. And if you look at the numbers of in terms of mortality, fatality, the numbers for children under a certain age, meaning young, their immune systems are very, very strong. They're very powerful, and they seem to be able to handle it very well, and that's according to every statistic.
The Academy of Pediatrics has concluded that children appear to transmit COVID-19 less than adults, and that many schools could reopen in the months ahead, provided they take precautions such as social distancing and tracking local transmission rates. Children are known to be far less likely to fall seriously ill or die from the virus. Less than 1% of children who test positive for COVID-19 end up dying, according to a Europe-wide study released in June. Now, the study authors said the true percentage is likely much lower still, since many children with mild or no symptoms would not have been tested at all. Now, Samsung unveiled an upgraded version of its folding smartphone along with other devices, aiming to jumpstart sales in a market hit hard by the global pandemic. Take a look.
Today, we are announcing the most powerful devices we've ever created to help you do just that. They are bold and beautiful. They redefine what's possible. Now, more than ever, we all need that. At this event time, and I'm very proud to announce our new Note. The Galaxy Note 20 and Note 20 Ultra. Mobile phones so powerful that they work like a computer and play like a gaming console. Together,
Samsung products has always been developed with the needs of our consumers in mind. And that will never change. And so today, we are excited to introduce 5 devices to our Galaxy ecosystem. Each has been designed with the next normal in mind, to power how we work.
The Galaxy Z Fold 2 has the most advanced flexible display ever, giving you an immersive theater, an epic game room, and a creative work studio, all in one, delivering an uninterrupted viewing experience.
Samsung maintained that folding phones and compatibility with super-fast 5G networks are the pillars of its mobile device future. Samsung in the second quarter saw smartphone sales slip 29% compared with a year ago, according to research firm IDC, as the firm lost the top position to China's Huawei in a slumping global market. And finally, in our news, a giant set of Olympic rings installed off Tokyo's waterfront was stowed away for inspections and maintenance after coronavirus forced the year-long postponement of the 2020 Games. Take a look.
東京都は今コロナ感染症のですね対策に一生懸命取り組んでおりまして、こちらはですねそのいわば戦いに誓ってですね、この後来年希望あふれる大会にできるようにということで一生懸命取り組んでおります。大会目指してですねこういった展示もですねしっかり続けてまた盛り上げを図っていきたいというふうに考えてございます。
And before we close, we leave you with a word of hope. At the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. See you again tomorrow evening. Good night. I'm Alma Angeles. We live in interesting times.